As the title suggests, we're going to be investigating the stomach in a little bit more detail in this video lecture. So the stomach and its gastric glands is what we're going to focus on. The stomach is a sac-like portion of the tract and its convoluted surface enabling expansion. Meaning you can get larger and smaller and adjust to the contents that it may have. It contains an extra layer of smooth muscle for mixing food with gastric juices. It doesn't just hold it as a sac, it can kind of move and mix that. It has two kinds of cells, parietal cells, which are the cells that are secreting hydrochloric acid, and chief cells, which are secreting pepsinogen. So we see that examples here, our parietal cells and our chief cells, both secreting their respective substances. This is very important for our digestive process. We see a zoomed in portion here. Notice that the stomach, as we look at it, the interior layer here, is a lot of these deep pits areas. Well, this is where these secretions are occurring, and they're ultimately coming out here. And this is why it's important during the mixing process, not only to get the hydrochloric acid and pepsinogen out, but to allow that food to have some form of mechanical digestion as well as this chemical digestion. Now, the human stomach produces about 2 liters of hydrochloric acid and other gastric secretions every single day. So it's kind of a staggering amount when you think about it. The gastric juice has a pH of approximately 2, so it's very acidic. This pH kills most bacteria ingested with the food and also denatures food proteins. This is a good thing because we want to start to break them down. The mixture of partially digested food and gastric juice is called chyme. If you remember, in our mouth, when we start adding saliva, that would be called a bolus. And now when we're mixing with these gastric juices, it now becomes chyme. Chyme leaves the stomach in the small intestine through the pyloric sphincter. Remember, sphincters can open and close, and that's what's allowing a portion of this food, hopefully after it's been at least partially digested, to start entering the small intestine. Keep in mind it goes from esophagus to stomach to small intestine, not the large intestine. Our gastric anatomy in general, it's storing ingested food, mechanical breakdown of ingested food, disruption of chemical bonds, these very harsh acidic environment, and also the enzymes that it produces. Production of intrinsic factor and this glycoprotein is required for absorption of vitamin B12 in the small intestine. So not only is it performing some breakdowns, it's also setting up the ingested food items for the next step. The stomach performs primary digestion of proteins by pepsin. So some digestion of carbohydrates by salivary amylase and lipids by the lingual lipase is occurring. What's important about the stomach is that it becomes more fluid. Again, around about 2 liters a day of just hydrochloric acid. It's a low pH, around 2. Pepsin activity increases. So we may think of enzymes always working at a neutral pH, and that's not the case. Pepsinogen actually has improved activity at a more acidic range. Protein disassembly is starting to begin here, and although digestion occurs in the stomach, nutrients are not absorbed, and that's a very important point to make here. This is purely digestion, both chemical and mechanical, but we have not absorbed anything yet. Both acid in the form of hydrochloric and pepsin in the form of enzymes and gastric juices, and our muscular contractions also occurring in the stomach. Important for the digestion process. Digestion is different than absorption. So ulcers, too much acid or bacteria, this is kind of interesting. The hormone gastrin regulates the synthesis of hydrochloric acid and increases our enzyme production. Overproduction of gastric acid can occasionally eat a hole through the stomach wall. It's called gastric ulcers. These are actually quite rare. Actually, what's been shown is there's actually this bacteria that will infect the cell walls, and that can cause ulcers to occur. Over 90% of the gastrointestinal ulcers are duodenal ulcers, and that's our small intestine there. It's caused by too much chyme in the small intestine, too much of that acid escaping out of the stomach and going into the small intestine. However, here, this bacteria here is entering and breaking down the mucous cell wall and getting ultimately to those layers of the epithelial tissue, and that break in that kind of barrier here is leading to that ulcer, so that burning that occurs. So actually ulcers in the stomach, while originally thought to be solely caused by high acid production, hydrochloric acid in particular, it's actually been related in many cases to the presence of this particular bacteria that's causing this. H. pylori is causing this kind of eating away of that protective layer, causing ulcers to form. So in this case, it would be better to take an antibiotic than an antacid to help reduce the presence of these ulcers. Lastly, heartburn or acid reflux. What's occurring here, this strong acid, this burning feeling in the chest caused by the stomach, the acid coming up the esophagus. This is typically due to a faulty esophageal sphincter. You see here that acid's able to sneak its way up, causing that burning sensation. This occurs especially when you're lying down or when you lay on your right side. The reason why it's more important on the right side is that's kind of the way the stomach's oriented, and it's easier for those gastric hydrochloric acid and acids in the stomach to kind of leak out that esophageal sphincter if it is in fact faulty.